Disciple-making movements create an environment where the Great Commission is truly obeyed. Through ministry, we bless a community. Our goal is to not only do good, but to have a natural opportunity to identify persons of peace. In this session, we will affirm the importance of connecting with a community through persons of peace. These are the people who use the existing relationships to introduce disciple makers to others within their family and or community. Because we are new to unreached communities, we do not have deep relationships. Yet, through persons of peace, we often have the opportunity to disciple them to become disciple makers within their families and friends. These are the few that God uses to reach the many. Sometimes they are the Andrews who connect us to the Peters. You will learn some of the key characteristics of persons of peace. Remember that prayer and fasting starts us on this exploration, and ministry gives us legitimate reason for being present. Now our strategy focuses on finding the few who God has already prepared so we can reach the many that He wants to come into a discipling relationship with Jesus. As you listen, I urge you to think about the value of putting into practice the approach Jesus taught in Matthew 10 and Luke 10. This approach has been incredibly fruitful across Africa. Imagine what would happen if you learn this from Jesus and then pass it on to everyone you seek to influence. Do not underestimate what God accomplishes through us when we follow Jesus' directions.
I met Kizito in 2013. We went to Western Kenya and in a place called Teso. We were there, I went there myself to mobilize the church if we can get people of peace in that place.
Pastor Joseph had a friend called Martin who introduced me to Joseph.
I shared with him a little bit about Discovery Bible Study, disciple-making movement, and he really embraced it. I was surprised that a Catholic, somebody from Catholic background can embrace DMM because it's so much closed up.
He taught us how to be a disciple maker and how to understand the Bible properly. Before I joined, I had few members, but right now the number has raised to 700 and they are well off with the Word of God and they can teach to others. Surely this process has helped me to make others to be disciples.
And through him, many churches have come up and disciple-making movement is going on in the charismatic movement in Western Kenya.
Finding a person of peace is central to disciple-making movements because we seek to gain access to and win over whole communities and not just individuals.
We found this strategy has been the most critical in penetrating a community because the person of peace is the person that has been prepared by God. It is God who is preparing that person ahead of time. And the person of peace also has a spiritual desire. There are something that is in his heart or in her heart that's just longing for answer.
God is doing something in his heart, in his life. And because of that, he has some questions. He's not satisfied with what he's doing. So he has questions, spiritual questions. And he is looking for someone to whom he will ask his questions.
We are not focusing on individual. Individuals are not the end by themselves. They are the entrance into the community. So the person of peace allows the gospel to receive for himself or herself and then pass it to the community, which is a family that they are. And the family, when the family accepts the Lord, then a Discovery Bible Study will start there. And from the Discovery Bible Study, a church will emerge. From the church, a leadership will emerge. After that leadership has been emerged, the church will get an obligation to go to the other neighbors and start the same thing.
So the persons of peace are people who are in the community prepared by God, so that when we engage with them, they will open up their communities to the gospel.
When I was exposed to the principle of person of peace and I implemented that, it was a release for me. No one can convince people if God is not doing that, if the Holy Spirit is not doing that.
The biblical idea of a person of peace comes from Luke 10 and Matthew 10. Jesus gave his disciples a strategy to engage with the lost, so that they can start doing disciple making. So he sent them, the Bible says, 2 by 2. But there's a lot of instruction in both of the passages in Luke 10 and Matthew 10. One of these instructions was, when you go to all the villages or the cities and the towns that you go, find a worthy person. And there's a record of worthy person. And that worthy person, if he invites you, stay in the house. If not, say, dust your feet and go. And so our concept of a person of peace comes from those two scriptures. One of the writers used a person of peace, the other worthy person. Different translations, but the same concept. And so we engage this community through Access Ministry to find the person of peace.
So a person of peace is really a person that God has prepared in a community to receive you. Somebody that God has placed in that community somehow by his own divine arrangement that will receive you. A person of peace is a local of a community that lives within the community, that knows the community, that understands the community. A person of peace is a person that opens his door voluntarily to you. It's a person that wants to listen to you and hear your story. A person of peace is willing to introduce you to the community, and if possible becomes your advocate in the community. A person of peace also is a person that is willing to take the gospel that you bring. But what normally we say is that if you go to any community, if you can't find a person of peace, you have to move on. No person of peace, no church planting. No person of peace, no church planting.
The person of peace can be a man, woman, can be young, old, can be maybe someone very bad in the community.
Witch doctors are people of influence. So we've worked through witch doctors to win communities and the witch doctor to Christ. But they didn't immediately turn to Christ. We worked through their leadership to win the whole community to Christ.
I always ask people their relationships. And part of accountability, as I spend time with people, I ask, who are you meeting? Where are you going to meet people? I know Jesus' command is go, and probably as you go, because we are always doing something, going out and we are engaging. So I always ask, who are you meeting? What are you doing with those relationships that you have? How far? How many people did you meet this week? The whole goal of asking this question, because in coaching, you ask a question more than just giving instruction. It's a relevant question to what this person should be doing. So how many people where did you go, and who are you planning to meet? And sometimes very specific people. And all these questions leads to something. And so for me, mostly coaching is in terms of asking strategic, deep questions that leads the person that I'm coaching into action and feedback of what practically he had done or she had done.
One of the first things that we do is go and speak to the police in an area to find out about the area. And as we do that, sometimes the policeman ends up being the person of peace. And he could be a high-ranking policeman. He often is the commander of that police station that then becomes a person of access to the police, but also to the community, to his family and to his community.
One of the stories that really fascinates me is a man in Kabbalah who was praying for many years. He said for 10 years in his village, he has been praying that God will send somebody to that village. He had had a contact with Jesus before. And when he came back to his village, there was no church. So he started praying with the people in the mosques. But he was praying in his heart that God will send somebody to his village to bring the message before he dies. And so, fortunately, we sent church planters. And the church planters went to the village. And when he saw the church planters, he said, I am not ready to die because I've been praying for this for 10 years. And that's how a church was planted in that community. And that's a fascinating story that somebody has been waiting. So God has prepared this man ahead of time. Also, there's another community a week ago that a church was planted in Burma. The person of peace is blind, completely blind. There have been no church, no mosques in the whole community. They believe in the African traditional religion. But this blind man, even though he had practiced the African traditional religion for so many years, but he just knew that there was a God powerful than what they were doing. And so he was asking God, can you bring these people here? And a few weeks ago, it was only last week that other church was also planted. The church planters walked into the community. And he, as a president, he received them. In fact, he provided all the resources that was needed just for the work to start. And so God has prepared. There are different stories in different places. In every place where there have been a church plant, there have always been somebody that God has prepared in that community. A man, a woman, a young person, a child that God has prepared in that community.
This brother was, before he was a brother, he was living among one of the less rich people groups, and he was having a serious problem because of the curse that has happened. A witch doctor cursed him literally to not have any children, and so they will experience miscarriage. So it's just they will have a baby and the baby dies 3 times, and they were really confused. And the community all respect that the witch doctor, whatever he says, is like coming out of the mouth of God. And so he was in that deep frustration when one of a disciple met him and shared with him about God can break this bondage and can deliver him. He could not believe about that. So he took him to a process and explaining with him about the power of Jesus that can break the bondage of sickness, curse, as well as death. That brother was willing to really hear about that one, and he came to the Lord, and his wife came to the Lord. Then people knew that now this man has changed his way of life in following Jesus, and they were expecting that the curse will even be worse to his life. Forget about the miscarriage, but it will happen dangerous things upon his family. When in the midst of that, his wife conceived and she became pregnant. They said, here we go now, the 4th time it's going to happen again. But the delivery was normal. The baby didn't happen anything to him. The people were surprised. What has happened? What kind of power is that? That will disqualify the previous power that's been manipulating this individual. And then he just was able to share what has happened. Jesus broke my bondage. Jesus broke my bondage. So because in that community everybody was fearful on these demonic witch doctors, and everybody is under the bondage of that fear. And people were amazed that he was boldly speaking about the power of Jesus being over every power. And people start to listen. And the second baby came. Again, it happens like that. It was a normal delivery. It was just, and then after that, the community start to say that the God of this man is greater than our gods. and they start to come. And as they were coming, they also themselves, as every individual, start to experience deliverance, bondage breakdown. As a result, families start to come, 10, 20, 100, few hundreds, and now in thousands. Just because of one individual, God has broken the bondage. And that person was the person of peace, whom the gospel have a way to penetrate into that community. It goes from that community even to the next community.
A certain chief in one of the communities came to the training to see somebody in one of our trainings. He actually didn't come for the training, but he came to see somebody who was in the training, who was a relative. And he ran a small shop in his village. And so while he was waiting for this person, he asked, can I listen to what you guys are saying? And he said, yeah, everybody's welcome. But he thought it was only for the people in the training. So after staying in the training for 1 hour, and the training was done because it was lunchtime, he came to the trainer and asked the question, I heard you say these things. Am I allowed to do these things? Or is it only for the people who are in the training? And I said, oh, you are allowed because it was Jesus' command to say that. So he went back, and obviously now, because he has all this relationship and he was the chief of the village, and he started telling people all these stories and what he was learning. He learned 3 things and he applied all the 3 things because it was all about being obedient. And then a group came up because he had friends with his businesses and all these things, and they started talking about all these things. Now he has a group and he doesn't know what to do. So he sent the information to the trainer and he said, I did all those 3 things that you said. Now there is a group and I don't know what to do. Please, can you come and do what you need to do, because you people knows what to do. I don't know what to be doing because I did all life. So he said, we don't have to come there. You come and we will teach you what to do next. That chief today is one of our best disciple makers, using his business, his networks. But now we have no reason of going there because he's already doing it. So we always bring him back for the training, does more. He actually started more groups than anybody else because he's a chief, one. So he is a man of influence. Secondly, he runs a business. He has so many customers. Third, now he knows the message. So through that, there's a series of different groups being started.
Once you find the person of peace, the work is half done. The things that you normally do when you find a person of peace, you stay in the home of the person of peace if it is possible. You create relationship with the person of peace by asking questions and answering questions. Listen to the person of peace. Learn from the person of peace. Let the person of peace tell you about the community. The third thing you need to do is that if you have listened, you've learned from the person of peace, the next thing is that you can ask the person of peace, I have a story about my life. I want to tell you. Do you want to hear my story? And then once the person of peace open up, you begin the story. Your story is always, you can start from your personal testimony, what God has done in your life. And that can navigate into telling the creation story. Once the person of peace opens up, then you can encourage the person of peace. If you are telling the story, the family of the person of peace, like I encourage him, do you have other family members that want to hear the story? And now the person of peace will begin to encourage other family members to come and begin to hear the story. And eventually, every night as you tell the story, you invite more family members to the storytelling. So by the time you finish the storytelling, you've had so many people coming to the storytelling. And eventually, it started with the person of peace, but now it has become a community affair.
Jesus said, go and make disciples. Sometimes the pastors say to people, come and the city and see. So that is a big difference. So the mode of Jesus is to go out and to find a person of peace. When you go out, God has already opened the door for many people in the community. So, and the work of God, there's not in the pulpit, there's in the community. when you find a person of peace and we stay with him there, that is Jesus said in the Luke chapter 10, he sent 2 by 2 to go in the village, in the cities. So when the people who receive them, stay with them and spend time with them, don't move house to house. So, this model of Jesus Christ, you can bring the multiplication of groups and churches.
When you have a personal, individual form of evangelism and you just try and win individuals, a person of peace may not seem strategic. But when you're trying to reach whole communities, whole families, whole affinities, then the person of peace is absolutely critical. He's the influencer, the leader that's already there in that community. When we try and win that community over, away from the person of peace, the existing leader, we create a competitive environment between us and that person. We're basically saying we're here to usurp your leadership, and it doesn't work. What we end up doing is we win one or two and we lose the many. And we kind of say that in our movement. We say the enemy's strategy is to help us win the one so that we can lose the many. And so we're after the many. We're after the entire group, the entire community in disciple-making movements. We'd rather go a bit slower and win everybody than go quick and win one. And then, by the nature of doing that, turn the community against us. So the person of peace is critical to that. We want to find the person that will give us access to an entire community. And then instead of usurping their leadership, instead of replacing their leadership, we want to empower them in their leadership. So we want to help them to lead their community, but lead them to Christ instead of wherever else they're leading them to. So finding that person is absolutely critical to winning a whole family or whole affinity or a whole community.